"Dad, you're a burden we can't afford anymore." My daughter said those words while I was lying in bed, recovering from a stroke. The same daughter I'd raised, educated, and loved unconditionally for 41 years. She stood in my doorway, arms crossed, delivering her verdict like a judge sentencing a criminal. No contribution, no food, fair is fair. I stayed silent. But inside, I was already planning her education and what fair really means, because Rebecca didn't know I owned the company that signs her ex-husband's paychecks. She didn't know I own the house she lives in rent-free. And she definitely didn't know about the $15 million she thinks doesn't exist. Sometimes the pawn becomes the queen. This story has more reversals than a courtroom drama. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this kind of betrayal reaches across America. My name is Edward Sullivan, and this is how I taught my daughter the true meaning of family. 3 heart attacks, a stroke that left my left leg dragging, and burying my wife Martha 2 years ago. Nothing prepared me for what my daughter said to me this morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table in Rebecca's house, the house she rents from Grandview Properties for $2,800 a month. Same table where I'd eaten breakfast every morning since moving in 6 months ago, after the doctor said I shouldn't live alone anymore. Rebecca stood there in her scrubs, coffee mug in one hand, calculation in her eyes. My 41-year-old daughter, the ICU nurse who saves lives for a living, was about to deliver a diagnosis that would change everything. "Dad, we need to talk about your situation here." I set down my spoon. The oatmeal suddenly tasted like cardboard. "Danny's been gone 6 months now," she continued, referring to her ex-husband, Daniel Hayes. "Money's tight with just my salary. Tommy's got college applications coming up, and frankly," she paused, choosing her words like a surgeon choosing instruments, "you're not contributing anything to this household." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. In the living room, I could hear my 16-year-old grandson, Tommy, getting ready for school, his backpack zipper echoing through the house. "What exactly are you saying, Rebecca?" She straightened her shoulders, that familiar look of righteous determination crossing her face, the same expression she'd worn as a child when she'd convinced herself that taking her brother's toys was justified because he wasn't using them properly. "I'm saying that if you can't contribute to the household expenses, maybe you shouldn't expect to share in the household resources. No contribution, no food. Fair is fair." My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass, not from the stroke, from the effort it took to keep my voice steady. "Fair," I repeated quietly. "Yes, let's talk about fair." She mistook my calm for defeat. "I'm glad you understand, Dad. Maybe it's time to look into some senior living options, places where you'd be more comfortable." I stood up slowly, my cane supporting my weight. "Rebecca, before we continue this conversation about what's fair and who contributes what, I need to make a phone call." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "To who?" I headed toward my room, each step deliberate and measured. "To your ex-husband. Let me tell you about Daniel Hayes, because understanding him is crucial to understanding everything that followed. Daniel had worked at Autotech Industries for 12 years, a decent manufacturing company that makes precision parts for automotive suppliers. Good benefits, steady pay, the kind of job that built the middle class. He'd started on the factory floor and worked his way up to shift supervisor, making $68,000 a year when Rebecca filed for divorce. The divorce wasn't pretty. Rebecca had discovered Daniel's affair with a coworker named Linda Martinez. Instead of fighting for the marriage, she went nuclear, hired the most aggressive attorney she could find, and took Daniel to the cleaners. Got the house, primary custody of Tommy, and alimony that left Daniel living in a 1-bedroom apartment across town. But here's what Rebecca didn't know. Daniel had lost his job 8 months ago. Not because of performance issues, not because of downsizing, because someone at the top of Autotech's corporate structure had made a very specific personnel decision. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. "Hello?" His voice carried that hollow sound of a man who'd been beaten down by circumstances beyond his control. Daniel, it's Ed Sullivan. A pause. I could practically hear him straightening up in his chair. Mr. Sullivan, how are you feeling? I'm doing fine, son, though I've had an interesting morning. Tell me, how's the job search going? The silence stretched longer this time. Daniel Hayes was a proud man, the kind who'd rather starve than admit weakness, but desperation has a way of eroding pride. It's challenging, sir. The market's tight right now. I imagine it is, especially when you've been out of work for 8 months. Another pause. Rebecca told you? Rebecca tells me lots of things, Daniel, but she doesn't tell me everything. I settled back in my chair, looking out the window at the neighborhood where my daughter lived. Nice houses, well-maintained lawns, the kind of place where appearances mattered more than truth. For instance, she never told me she's been struggling to make the rent payments since your alimony stopped. Sir, I want to pay, but I can't pay what I don't have. Of course you can't, which brings me to why I'm calling. I paused, listening to the sound of Rebecca's footsteps pacing in the kitchen. She was agitated, probably wondering what I could possibly have to discuss with her ex-husband. I understand you'd like to return to Autotech. The intake of breath was sharp enough to hear through the phone. How did you... Yes, sir. I've been trying to reach someone there for months. My former supervisor, the HR department, anyone who'd listen. I was a good employee, Mr. Sullivan. I made one mistake in my personal life, but I never let it affect my work. One mistake, I repeated softly. That's an interesting way to phrase it. Sir, I know what I did to Rebecca was wrong. The affair, the lying, I'm not proud of it. But I'm Tommy's father, and I want to provide for him. I need that job back. In the kitchen, I could hear Rebecca starting the dishwasher with more force than necessary. The woman who'd just told her father he didn't deserve food was stress cleaning. Daniel, let me ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you believe a man should contribute to his household to earn his place at the table? Of course I do, sir. A man who doesn't provide isn't much of a man at all. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. Here was Rebecca's ex-husband, unknowingly agreeing with the principle she'd just used to humiliate her own father. I'm glad to hear you say that, because as it happens, I might be in a position to help you at your job back. The silence that followed was different, charged with possibility and confusion in equal measure. I don't understand, Mr. Sullivan. You're retired. How could you possibly help me with Autotech? I could hear Rebecca's footsteps approaching the bedroom door. She was listening, of course, probably wondering what her old, useless father could possibly offer her ex-husband that would matter to anyone. Daniel, there's something I need to tell you about Autotech Industries. Something that might surprise you. What's that, sir? I own it. The phone went dead silent. Even Rebecca's footsteps stopped. Sir, I'm sorry. I think I misheard you. Did you say you own 61% of Autotech Industries, to be precise, through Sullivan Holdings LLC, incorporated in Delaware in 2019? I've been what you might call a silent partner for the past 6 years. I could hear Daniel's breathing change, could practically feel the seismic shift in his understanding of the world, but Daniel wasn't the only one whose world was shifting. Rebecca was standing outside my door now. Dad? Rebecca's voice came through the door, carefully controlled, but with an edge that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. Could I speak with you for a moment? I covered the phone's mouthpiece. I'm on an important call, sweetheart. Give me a few minutes. But Rebecca Sullivan Hayes wasn't the type of woman who waited for permission. The door opened without invitation, and she stepped into my room with the kind of purposeful stride that had probably terrified many an intern at Regional Medical Center. She was still in her scrubs, but something had changed in her posture. The casual cruelty from breakfast had been replaced by something sharper, more calculating. When money entered the equation, Rebecca's entire demeanor shifted. I couldn't help but overhear, she said, her voice carrying that forced sweetness that meant trouble was coming. Did you just tell Danny you own his old company? I held up a finger indicating I was still on the phone. Daniel, are you still there? Yes, sir, I'm trying to process what you just told me. I understand it's a lot to take in. Here's what I'd like you to do. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I want you to call the main auto tech number and ask to speak with Janet Cooper. She's my attorney, and she handles certain personnel matters for the company. Tell her Edward Sullivan referred you. Rebecca's face had gone through several shades of pale during this conversation. The woman who denied her father breakfast was beginning to understand that the power dynamics in her household were far more complex than she'd imagined. Mr. Sullivan, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet, son. But Daniel? I glanced up at Rebecca, whose jaw was tightening with each word. When you do get your job back, and you will, I want you to remember something. A man's worth isn't measured by his mistakes. It's measured by how he handles the consequences. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I don't know how to repay. Just be a good father to Tommy. That's payment enough. I ended the call and set the phone down carefully on my nightstand. Rebecca was still standing in the doorway, her mind visibly racing through implications and recalculations. Dad, what the hell was that about? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The same blue eyes as her mother, but where Martha's had held warmth and wisdom, Rebecca's held something colder, more transactional. Language, Rebecca. Tommy might hear. Don't deflect. Did you just tell my ex-husband that you own Autotech Industries? I told him the truth. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. That's impossible. You're a retired mechanic. You live on Social Security and a small pension. You can barely afford your medications. Is that what you think? It's what I know, Dad. I've seen your bank statements when you needed help with bills. You have maybe $12,000 in savings, and your monthly income is what? $1,800? You're living here because you can't afford to live anywhere else. I reached for my cane and stood up slowly. Rebecca, sit down. I don't need to sit down. I need you to explain what kind of game you're playing. It's not a game, and it's not a lie. I walked to my dresser and pulled out a manila folder from the bottom drawer. Inside were documents I'd hoped I'd never need to show my daughter. Autotech Industries was incorporated in 1987. I bought my first shares in 1996 with money from a patent I sold to Ford Motor Company. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the papers. Stock certificates, corporate filings, bank statements showing figures that made her alimony payments look like lunch money. This can't be real. Sullivan Holdings LLC owns 61% of Autotech Industries. The company employs 437 people, including your ex-husband, for 12 years, until I had him terminated 8 months ago. The color drained from her face completely. You had him fired? I had him removed from the payroll, yes. But why would you... She stopped mid-sentence, her nurse's training kicking in as she processed cause and effect. Oh my God, you were testing me. I watched my daughter's face as understanding dawned. Rebecca, we need to discuss what happened at breakfast this morning. The stock certificates trembled in Rebecca's hands as she tried to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she thought she knew about her father. Numbers don't lie, but they can certainly shock. $15.3 million, she whispered, reading from the portfolio summary. Dad, this says you're worth $15.3 million. The market fluctuates, I said calmly, settling back into my chair. Yesterday it was 15.7. The week before, it was 14.9. She sank onto the edge of my bed, still clutching the papers. How is this possible? Where did this money come from? 42 years of careful investing, Rebecca. Your mother and I lived modestly, saved aggressively, and I had a talent for seeing opportunities others missed. I gestured to the documents. That patent I mentioned, the one I sold to Ford in 1996, it was for a fuel injection component that's still being used today. I invested that money in Autotech when they were a struggling startup. But you've been living like, she struggled for words, like you're poor. I've been living within the budget I set for myself. There's a difference. Rebecca's face was cycling through emotions faster than I could track them. Confusion, anger, embarrassment, and something else. Something that looked disturbingly like calculation. Why didn't you tell me? All these years watching me stress about money, about Tommy's college fund, about making ends meet after the divorce. Why didn't you say anything? This was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The question that would reveal whether my daughter was the person I'd raised her to be, or the person I'd feared she was becoming. Because I wanted to see what kind of woman you'd become when you thought I had nothing left to offer. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Rebecca's face went through several expressions before settling on something that looked like wounded pride mixed with growing anger. So this was all a test? Everything. Danny losing his job, me struggling to pay bills, having to take care of you. It was all some elaborate experiment? Not everything. Your mother's death was real. My stroke was real. My need for help after the hospital was real. I leaned forward slightly. But yes, I wanted to see how you'd treat a father who couldn't write you checks anymore. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. That's manipulative as hell, Dad. Perhaps, but it was also illuminating. What's that supposed to mean? I took my time answering, watching her reflection in the window glass. Rebecca had inherited her mother's beauty, but not her grace. Where Martha would have asked how she could help, Rebecca was calculating how this news affected her own position. This morning, you told me I didn't deserve food because I wasn't contributing to the household. You suggested I should go to a nursing home because I was a burden you could no longer afford. I was being practical. You were being cruel, and more importantly, you were wrong about the facts. She turned from the window, her face flushed. Wrong about what facts? I reached for another folder, this one containing property records and bank statements. You're not paying $2,800 a month rent to Grandview Properties, Rebecca. You haven't paid rent in 6 months. Her mouth opened, then closed without sound. I own this house through Sullivan Holdings. I've been covering your rent payments since Daniel's alimony stopped. The utilities, too, and Tommy's car insurance, and his cell phone plan. With each revelation, Rebecca's face grew paler. That's impossible. I write the checks myself. You write checks to Grandview Properties Management Company. They deposit those checks into an account I control. Then I deposit the money right back into your checking account through automatic transfer. She grabbed the property documents from my hands, scanning them frantically. This has to be a mistake. No mistake. Look at line 17. Property owner, Sullivan Holdings, LLC, registered agent Edward J. Sullivan. I watched her trace the words with her finger. You've been living in my house, eating food I paid for, driving a car whose insurance I cover, while telling me I don't contribute enough to deserve a meal. The irony was so complete, so perfect, that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Dad, I had no idea. You should have told me. Should I have? When exactly would have been the appropriate time? Before or after you called me a burden? Before or after you suggested I'd be more comfortable in a nursing home? Rebecca set the papers down with hands that weren't quite steady. I was frustrated. Money's been tight, and I thought, you thought your old disabled father was a deadweight you could dispose of once he stopped being useful. The accusation hit like a slap. Rebecca's face cycled through denial, anger, and something that might have been shame. That's not fair. Fair? I stood up, my cane tapping against the hardwood floor. Let's talk about fair, Rebecca. Fair would have been treating your father with basic respect regardless of his financial situation. Fair would have been having this conversation before you decided I wasn't worth feeding. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the financial documents scattered across my bed. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. What happens now? Before I could answer, the phone rang. The caller ID showed Regional Medical Center. Rebecca's face went rigid as she recognized her workplace's number. That's probably for me, she said, reaching for the phone. I picked it up first. Sullivan Residence. Is this Edward Sullivan? The voice was crisp, professional, female. Speaking. Mr. Sullivan, this is Janet Cooper from Cooper & Associates Legal. You asked me to call when I'd completed the preliminary review of the trust documents. Rebecca's eyes widened. She knew Janet's name. Every nurse at Regional knew the attorney who'd handled the hospital's most complex malpractice cases. Yes, Janet. Thank you for calling. What did you find? Sir, I think we should discuss this in person, but I can tell you that the irregularities in Tommy's education trust are more extensive than we initially thought. I glanced at Rebecca, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. How extensive? $45,000 in unauthorized withdrawals over the past 6 months, all signed with Rebecca Sullivan Hayes as trustee, but the documentation doesn't match the trust's legal requirements for disbursement. Rebecca grabbed my arm, shaking her head frantically and mouthing the word no, but the truth has a way of insisting on itself. Janet, I'm putting you on speaker. My daughter is here, and she should hear this directly. Mr. Sullivan, I don't think, it's necessary. The sound of Janet clearing her throat filled the room. Mrs. Hayes, my name is Janet Cooper. I'm your father's attorney, and I've been reviewing the education trust established for your son, Tommy. Rebecca found her voice, though it came out smaller than usual. There must be some mistake. I'm the trustee. I have every right to access those funds for Tommy's educational expenses. That's correct, Mrs. Hayes. However, the trust document specifies that educational expenses include tuition, books, and approved living costs for accredited institutions. It doesn't include luxury items, vacation expenses, or personal debt payments. I watched my daughter's face as Janet methodically dismantled her justifications. The spa weekend in Charlotte, the designer handbags she'd claimed were professional wardrobe necessities, the credit card debt she'd consolidated using Tommy's college money. Furthermore, Janet continued, the trust requires co-trustee approval for any withdrawal over $5,000. Mr. Sullivan, as co-trustee, never approved these disbursements. Because I was never told about them, I said quietly. Rebecca's voice turned defensive. Dad, you had your stroke. You were in rehabilitation. I didn't want to burden you with financial details while you were recovering. Mrs. Hayes, Janet's voice carried the kind of professional chill that had made opposing attorneys tremble. Your father suffered his stroke 14 months ago. These withdrawals began 6 months ago. His cognitive function has been fully restored since his discharge from rehabilitation 8 months ago. The timeline was damning. Rebecca had waited until she thought I was weak enough, confused enough, dependent enough that she could raid Tommy's future without consequence. The trust can be frozen immediately, Janet continued, and given the pattern of unauthorized access, we may need to consider whether criminal charges are appropriate. Criminal charges? Rebecca's voice cracked. This is family money. I'm Tommy's mother. Mrs. Hayes, theft is theft regardless of family relationships, and $45,000 constitutes grand larceny in this state. I held up my hand. Janet, let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is still a family matter. Of course, Mr. Sullivan. I'll await your instructions. After I hung up, Rebecca and I sat in silence. She was staring at the floor, her hands twisted in her lap. Dad, I can explain. I'm listening. After Danny lost his job, I panicked. The divorce attorney's fees, the house payments, Tommy's car, everything was falling apart. I thought I could borrow from the trust temporarily, just until I got back on my feet. Borrowed, I repeated. With what intention to repay? She looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my lap after a nightmare. But that little girl was long gone, replaced by a woman who'd convinced herself that desperation justified betrayal. I was going to put it back when Danny started paying alimony again. Except Danny couldn't pay alimony because he lost his job, the job I had him removed from. You keep saying that like it's some kind of victory. You destroyed an innocent man's life to test me? I tested you, Rebecca. You destroyed your own life by failing the test. She stood up abruptly, pacing again. This is insane. You're sitting here like some kind of puppet master, pulling strings, manipulating everyone's lives, and then judging us for reacting to the chaos you created. I didn't create chaos. I revealed character. Whose character? Mine? What about yours? What kind of father puts his daughter through this kind of psychological torture? The question hung between us like a challenge. It was fair in its way. What kind of father watches his child struggle without offering help? What kind of man tests loyalty by withholding love? But before I could answer, we heard the front door slam. Heavy footsteps in the hallway, young, angry strides that belonged to only one person in this house. Mom? Tommy's voice carried from the living room. We need to talk. Now. Rebecca's face went white. Tommy's supposed to be in school. Apparently not. The footsteps approached my bedroom door, and Tommy appeared in the doorway. 16 years old, tall like his father, but with Rebecca's stubborn jaw. He was holding something in his hand, a small digital device. "Grandpa," he said, nodding to me with the kind of respect his mother had forgotten how to show. Then he turned to Rebecca. "Mom, I've been recording your conversations for 3 weeks." Rebecca's knees buckled slightly. "What?" "Ever since you started talking about putting Grandpa in Sunset Manor, I wanted to know if you were really going to do it." He held up the device, a digital recorder, no bigger than a thumb drive. "I've got everything. The breakfast conversation this morning, the phone calls with the nursing home, the conversations with your lawyer about getting power of attorney." Rebecca reached for the recorder, but Tommy stepped back. "Tommy, give me that right now." "No, Mom." "Because you know what else I recorded?" He looked at me, then back at his mother. "I recorded you bragging to Aunt Sarah about how you're going to inherit Grandpa's money when he dies." The silence that followed was deafening. "Tommy, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly, Mom. I understand that Grandpa owns this house. I understand that he's been paying our bills. And I understand that you've been stealing my college money while planning to dump him in a nursing home." Rebecca reached for her son, but he stepped further back. "And here's the thing that really pisses me off, Mom. I recorded you laughing about it." The recording device looked tiny in Tommy's hands, but the weight of what it contained filled the room like smoke. Rebecca stared at it as if it were a loaded gun pointed at her heart. "Tommy, sweetheart, you don't understand the complexity of adult situations. Don't." His voice carried an authority that didn't belong to most 16-year-olds. "Don't treat me like I'm stupid, Mom. I understand plenty." He pressed a button, and Rebecca's own voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. "Sarah, I swear to God, he's like a broken-down car that costs more to maintain than it's worth. But the lawyer says if I can prove he's mentally incompetent, I can get conservatorship, and then—" Laughter. Cold, calculating laughter. "Let's just say Tommy's college is going to be very well-funded." Rebecca's face crumpled. "Tommy, that was taken out of context. I was frustrated. There's more." Tommy's finger hovered over the play button. "Want to hear the part where you told Aunt Sarah that Grandpa probably won't last another year anyway, so you just have to be patient?" "Stop." Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. But Tommy wasn't finished. He pressed play again. "The beauty is that he doesn't have any other children. It's just me. And once he's in the nursing home, I can sell this house, liquidate whatever savings he has left, and set myself up properly. Tommy will get his college money, I'll get my freedom, and dear old Dad will get the kind of care he actually deserves." The recording ended. In the silence that followed, I could hear Rebecca's breathing become shallow and rapid. "When did you record that?" she asked. "Last Tuesday night, while Grandpa was asleep and you thought I was doing homework." Rebecca turned to me, her eyes desperate. "Dad, I was just venting. Everyone says things they don't mean when they're stressed." "Do they?" I kept my voice level, but inside something was breaking. Not surprise. I'd suspected Rebecca's true feelings for months, but hearing them spoken aloud, with such casual cruelty, was different than knowing them in theory. "Yes, for God's sake, I'm a single mother, trying to keep everything together. I'm allowed to have frustrated moments." Tommy stepped forward, his young face hard with disappointment. "Mom, it wasn't a moment. It was a 30-minute conversation where you planned out Grandpa's entire future like you were organizing a grocery list. Tommy, you're too young to understand. I'm old enough to know right from wrong, which is apparently more than I can say for you." The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. She reached for the wall to steady herself. "How long have you been recording me?" 3 weeks. Ever since I overheard you on the phone with Sunset Manor, asking about their rates for memory care patients." Tommy's voice carried a bitterness that no 16-year-old should possess. "Grandpa doesn't have memory problems, Mom. He remembers everything. He just can't fight back anymore." "That's not true. I've been taking care of him. You've been waiting for him to die." The accusation hung in the air like a verdict. Rebecca looked from Tommy to me, searching for some kind of support, some indication that this nightmare could be walked back. "Dad, tell him I've been taking care of you." I thought about my response carefully. Rebecca, you've provided me with shelter and basic necessities. But care? Care implies affection. It implies respect. It implies treating someone like a human being rather than an inconvenience. I never said you were an inconvenience. This morning you told me I didn't deserve food. I was trying to motivate you to what? To magically become young again? To undo my stroke? To resurrect your mother so I wouldn't be your responsibility anymore? She had no answer for that. Tommy walked to my bedside and sat down, the recorder still in his hand. Grandpa, there's something else you should know. Rebecca's face went white. Tommy, don't. Mom's been telling people at the hospital that you're getting worse, that you're confused, that you wander around at night, that you're becoming aggressive. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Aggressive? She told Dr. Martinez that you tried to hit her last week. She's been building a case for having you declared incompetent. Rebecca was backing toward the door now. That's enough, Tommy. You're grounded. Go to your room. No. Tommy's voice was quiet but firm. I'm not going anywhere. You are 16 years old, and you will do what I tell you. Why? So you can call Dr. Martinez and tell him Grandpa's having another episode? So you can have him sedated and shipped off to Sunset Manor before anyone asks questions? The plan was breathtakingly simple and utterly ruthless. Discredit me medically, gain conservatorship, liquidate my assets, and warehouse me in a nursing home until I died. Clean, legal, and profitable. Rebecca, I said quietly, is that really what you've been planning? She couldn't meet my eyes. Dad, you have to understand, I'm drowning here. The bills, the stress, taking care of you on top of everything else, I can't do it anymore. So you decided to destroy me instead of asking for help. I didn't decide to destroy you. I decided to make practical arrangements for your care. Practical arrangements. I repeated the phrase slowly, tasting the institutional coldness of it. Is that what you call fraud and elder abuse? It's not abuse if it's necessary. Tommy stood up abruptly. Mom, listen to yourself. You sound like a monster. Rebecca's composure finally cracked completely. I am not a monster. I'm a woman who's been trying to hold this family together since your father decided to blow up our lives. I'm tired, I'm broke, and I'm doing the best I can with impossible circumstances. By stealing my college money and planning to dump Grandpa in a nursing home? By making hard choices that you're too young to understand. And the shouting brought us to the edge of something that couldn't be taken back. Rebecca was breathing hard, her face flushed with anger and desperation. Tommy was staring at his mother like she was a stranger, and I was sitting there watching my family disintegrate in real time. That's when the doorbell rang. Rebecca froze. Who could that be? I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. That would be Janet Cooper. Your lawyer? Why is she here? Because I called her after our breakfast conversation this morning. I started to stand, leaning heavily on my cane. I told her we might need to discuss some urgent legal matters. Rebecca's face went white. Dad, what did you do? What I should have done months ago. The doorbell rang again, longer this time. I protected my grandson's future. Janet Cooper stood in our doorway like an angel of legal judgment, her briefcase in one hand and a folder thick with documents in the other. At 65, she had the kind of silver-haired authority that made opposing counsel nervous and clients confident. Edward, she said, stepping into the foyer, I came as soon as I could. Her eyes swept the scene. Rebecca's flushed face, Tommy clutching his recording device, me with my cane. I take it we have a situation that needs immediate attention. We do indeed, Rebecca found her voice. Ms. Cooper, I think there's been some misunderstanding. This is a family matter. Mrs. Hayes, there's no misunderstanding. Janet's voice carried 30 years of courtroom authority. I've spent the morning reviewing the documentation your father provided, and I'm afraid we're well beyond the realm of family disputes. She opened her briefcase and withdrew a document that made Rebecca take an involuntary step backward. This is a restraining order, signed by Judge Morrison an hour ago. It prohibits you from removing Edward Sullivan from his current residence without his explicit consent and independent legal counsel. A restraining order? Against me? I'm his daughter. You're also, according to the evidence I've reviewed, attempting to defraud him of his assets while committing him to an institution against his will. Janet's tone remained professional, but there was steel underneath. Family relationship doesn't exempt you from criminal law, Mrs. Hayes. Tommy looked between his mother and Janet. What does that mean exactly? Janet turned to him with a gentler expression. It means your grandfather can't be forced into a nursing home against his will. And it means your college fund is now protected by court order. Rebecca's face went through several shades of pale. Court order? The trust has been frozen pending investigation. All accounts associated with it have been flagged for suspicious activity. Janet consulted her notes. The unauthorized withdrawals you made total $47,836. That's a Class C felony in this state. Ms. Cooper, surely we can work something out. I can pay the money back. With what funds, Mrs. Hayes? Your father's analysis of your financial situation shows you're approximately $68,000 in debt beyond the stolen trust money. Your credit cards are maxed. You're 3 months behind on your car payment, and you haven't paid the utilities in this house since January. Each revelation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. I watched my daughter realize that her careful facades were crumbling, that her father's senility had actually been careful documentation of her deceptions. Dad, how long have you been investigating me? Since the day you first suggested I might be more comfortable somewhere else. Janet opened her folder and spread documents across the coffee table. What about Edward, I need to tell you about something we discovered this afternoon. Something that changes the scope of this situation considerably. My stomach tightened. What is it? Rebecca has already been in contact with Sunset Manor. She's not just planning to commit you. She's already signed preliminary paperwork. Rebecca's face went white. That's not... I was just exploring options. Mrs. Hayes, you signed a financial responsibility agreement for a private room at $8,500 per month. You listed yourself as your father's legal guardian. Janet's voice was crisp with professional disapproval. You also provided falsified medical records claiming he has advancing dementia and requires 24-hour supervision. The room went dead silent. Tommy was staring at his mother with undisguised horror. Mom, you forged medical records? Rebecca's voice came out in a whisper. I was protecting him and protecting you. If something happened to him while I was at work, if he fell again or had another stroke, so you lied to doctors about his condition? I exaggerated some symptoms to make sure he'd get proper care. Janet consulted another document. Mrs. Hayes, according to these records you submitted, your father is unable to perform basic functions, has no memory of recent events, and has become physically aggressive toward one family members. Is any of that true? Rebecca looked trapped. He's had some confusion. I have not, I said firmly, and you know I haven't. Janet, show her the other document. Janet withdrew a single sheet of paper that made Rebecca stumble backward. This is a neurological evaluation performed last month by Dr. Elizabeth Warren at Jefferson Medical Center. The evaluation you don't know about, Mrs. Hayes, because your father had it done independently. Janet's voice carried the weight of evidence. It shows normal cognitive function across all metrics. No dementia, no confusion, no memory loss. Rebecca sank onto the couch. You had your own evaluation done? I wanted documentation of my mental state for exactly this situation. I sat down across from her, my cane resting against my knee. I suspected you were planning something, but I needed proof of my competency before you could claim otherwise. Tommy was reading over Janet's shoulder. This says Grandpa tested above average for his age group in memory and reasoning. Significantly above average, Janet confirmed, which makes the medical records your mother submitted to Sunset Manor clearly fraudulent. Rebecca, I said quietly, did you really think I wouldn't notice you were setting me up? She couldn't meet my eyes. Dad, I was scared. The responsibility, the financial pressure, I felt like I was drowning. And you seemed so detached, like you'd given up. I was watching and waiting. For what? For you to show me who you really are. Janet cleared her throat. Edward, there's one more thing. The records show that Rebecca has already received the first month's payment from Sunset Manor. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean? She received $8,500 2 weeks ago as a deposit against your future care. The money was supposed to be refundable if placement didn't occur within 30 days. Where is that money now? Rebecca's silence was answer enough. Janet consulted her notes. Based on bank records, it was used to pay down credit card debt and cover the car payment she'd missed. I felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart. That had been broken for months. Something deeper. Some fundamental faith in the possibility that people could change, that love could overcome greed, that family meant something more than financial convenience. Rebecca, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, you've already spent the money they gave you to warehouse me. Dad, I was going to pay it back when I died? The question hung in the air like an accusation and a prophecy. Rebecca started crying, not the pretty manipulative tears she'd used since childhood, but ugly, desperate sobbing. I never wanted it to be like this. I wanted my life back. Tommy stood up, the recording device still in his hand. Mom, Grandpa is our family. He's not something you get your life back from. Tommy, you don't understand how hard it's been. I understand that you've been lying to everyone. To the doctors, to the nursing home, to me, to Grandpa. You've been lying about everything. Janet began gathering her documents. Edward, I need to ask you directly. Do you feel safe in this house tonight? I looked at Rebecca, slumped on the couch, her plans in ruins around her. I looked at Tommy, clutching evidence of his mother's betrayal. I thought about the signed papers at Sunset Manor, the falsified medical records, the stolen college money. No, I said finally. No, I don't think I do. Janet pulled out her phone. I'm calling the county elder abuse hotline. This situation requires immediate intervention. Wait. I held up my hand. Not yet. Both Janet and Tommy looked at me with surprise. Rebecca raised her head from her hands, hope flickering across her tear-stained face. Dad? Janet, I want to give Rebecca one chance to make this right. My attorney frowned. Edward, given what we've discovered today, I strongly advise against one chance, I repeated. But we're going to do it properly, legally, with documentation. Rebecca straightened slightly. What do you mean? I reached for the phone on my side table. I mean, I'm going to call Sunset Manor and tell them there's been a misunderstanding, that the placement is canceled and the deposit needs to be returned immediately. Dad, the money's already gone. I told you, I know where the money went, Rebecca. The question is whether you're going to help me get it back, or whether Janet is going to file criminal charges tonight. Janet set down her briefcase with obvious reluctance. Edward, this is highly irregular. The evidence we have is sufficient for prosecution without any cooperation from Mrs. Hayes. But prosecution isn't my goal, Janet. Justice is. Tommy looked between us. What's the difference? Prosecution punishes the crime after it's been completed. Justice prevents future harm while giving people a chance to redeem themselves. I dialed the number for Sunset Manor from memory. Rebecca watched me with growing anxiety as the phone rang. Sunset Manor, this is Diane speaking. Diane, this is Edward Sullivan. I believe my daughter, Rebecca Hayes, has been in contact with you about placement arrangements. Yes, Mr. Sullivan. We've been expecting your arrival next Monday. Is there something I can help you with? There's been a misunderstanding. I won't be requiring your services after all. I'd like to cancel the arrangement and have our deposit returned. A pause. Sir, I'll need to speak with your daughter about that. She's your appointed guardian, and she's already completed all the paperwork. I looked directly at Rebecca. Actually, Diane, that's the misunderstanding. My daughter is not my guardian. I'm fully competent, and I never consented to placement in your facility. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Hayes provided medical documentation showing that you have advancing dementia and require supervised care. Those documents were falsified. The silence that followed was heavy with legal implications. When Diane spoke again, her voice was carefully professional. Sir, are you saying that fraudulent medical records were submitted to our facility? I'm saying that if you check with Dr. Elizabeth Warren at Jefferson Medical Center, you'll find that my actual medical status is significantly different from what my daughter reported. Rebecca was shaking her head frantically, but I continued. I'm also saying that the deposit you paid to my daughter needs to be returned immediately, as it was received under false pretenses. Mr. Sullivan, I'll need to speak with our administrator and our legal department. This is a very serious matter. I understand. My attorney, Janet Cooper, will be contacting your facility tomorrow morning to discuss the situation further. After I hung up, Rebecca was staring at me with undisguised panic. Dad, what have you done? I've given Sunset Manor the information they need to protect themselves from a lawsuit. They take elder abuse very seriously, Rebecca, particularly when it involves forged medical records and fraudulent placements. Janet was taking notes rapidly. Edward, that was well handled. Now they're legally obligated to investigate the documentation Rebecca provided. What does that mean for me? Rebecca's voice was small. It means they'll compare the medical records you submitted to the actual records from your father's doctors. When they find discrepancies, they'll be required to report potential fraud to the state health department. Tommy was recording again, I noticed. Smart boy. He was documenting everything now, creating a record that would protect all of us. But Dad, Rebecca said desperately, if they investigate and they find out what I did, then you'll face the consequences of your choices. She looked around the room, at Janet's legal documents, at Tommy's recorder, at the evidence of her deception spread across the coffee table. There has to be another way. There is, I said quietly. Tell me the truth. All of it. Right now. Rebecca looked trapped, cornered between confession and catastrophe. And if I do? Then maybe we can find a solution that doesn't destroy this family completely. She took a shuddering breath. Dad, there's something else you don't know. Rebecca's confession came out in a rush, like poison finally being expelled from a wound. The money from Sunset Manor wasn't the first time. Janet stopped taking notes and looked up sharply. What do you mean? I've been taking money from Dad's accounts for 8 months. Small amounts at first, transfers that would look like routine expenses. I felt the room temperature drop by 10 degrees. How much, Rebecca? About $32,000 total. Tommy nearly dropped his recorder. $32,000? On top of my college money? I was desperate. After Danny lost his job, after the divorce costs, I couldn't keep up with everything. I thought I could pay it back when things stabilized. Janet was scribbling furiously. Mrs. Hayes, are you saying you've been systematically stealing from your father's personal accounts without his knowledge? I had access because I help him with bills, the bank cards, the online passwords. He gave them to me when he was recovering from his stroke. That was true. During those first confusing weeks after the hospital, I had asked Rebecca to help manage the day-to-day finances. I'd trusted her with access I never should have granted. But that access was for legitimate household expenses, Janet said, not personal debt consolidation. I know that now. Tommy was staring at his mother like she was a stranger. Mom, you stole $77,000 from Grandpa? $77,000? The number hung in the air like a judgment. Rebecca began crying again, but these tears felt different. Less desperate, more resigned. I never meant for it to go this far. It started with small things, a credit card payment here, a car payment there, things I told myself I'd pay back as soon as I got a handle on everything. But it escalated, Janet observed. Every month there was something new. Tommy needed new clothes, the car needed repairs, the house needed maintenance, and Dad seemed so detached, like he wasn't paying attention to anything anymore. I was paying attention to everything, I said quietly, including the fact that you were stealing from me. Rebecca's head snapped up. You knew. I've known since the third unauthorized transfer. I just wanted to see how far you'd go. The betrayal on her face would have been comical if it weren't so tragic. You've been watching me steal from you for 8 months? I've been documenting your theft for 8 months. There's a difference. Janet leaned forward. Edward, you've been building a case? I nodded toward my dresser. Every transaction, every forged signature, every falsified medical record. I have copies of everything. Rebecca stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. So this whole thing, the weakness, the confusion, the dependence on me, it was all an act? Not all of it. My stroke was real. My need for help was real. My grief over your mother was real. I paused, choosing my words carefully. But my supposed inability to manage my own affairs? That was performance art. You manipulative son of a... Rebecca, Tommy's voice cut through her anger. He only manipulated you into showing who you really are. She whirled on her son. Don't you dare take his side. I've been working myself to death trying to take care of both of you. By stealing from him and lying about his medical condition? By doing whatever was necessary to keep this family together? The shouting brought us to the precipice again. Janet cleared her throat diplomatically. Mrs. Hayes, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. Rebecca turned from the window, her face streaked with tears and anger. What? Beyond the financial theft and the falsified medical records, have you done anything else that could be considered elder abuse? The question seemed to hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She looked at Janet, then at Tommy, then at me. I don't understand what you're asking. Have you ever withheld medical care? Denied food or water? Used physical force? Isolated him from friends or family members? Each question landed like an accusation. Rebecca's face went through several expressions before settling on something that looked like guilt. There have been times when I've had to be firm with him. Define firm. Tommy stepped forward, the recorder still running. Mom, tell them about last week when you locked Grandpa in his room. Rebecca's face went white. Tommy, that was for his own safety. What happened last week? Janet's voice carried professional alarm. Tommy looked at his mother, then at me. Mom said Grandpa was having an episode. She locked him in his bedroom for 6 hours while she was at work. She told me he was confused and dangerous. Is that true? Janet asked. I nodded slowly. She locked me in my room because I'd told her I was going to call my banker about some discrepancies in my account statements. Dad, you were confused. You didn't know what you were saying. Rebecca, I was trying to catch you in the act of stealing from me. I was perfectly coherent. Janet was writing rapidly again. Mrs. Hayes, locking an elderly person in a room against their will constitutes false imprisonment. Combined with the financial exploitation and fraudulent medical claims, we're looking at multiple felony charges. Rebecca sank back onto the couch, the fight going out of her completely. What happens now? Before anyone could answer, the phone rang again. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but Janet glanced at it and nodded grimly. That'll be the State Health Department. They respond quickly to reports of medical fraud involving vulnerable adults. Rebecca looked at me with eyes that held more fear than I'd ever seen. Dad, please. I'll pay everything back. I'll make this right. Just don't let them arrest me. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The woman who'd once been my pride and joy, now reduced to begging for mercy from a father she'd tried to destroy. Rebecca, I said softly, it's too late for that now. The phone kept ringing. Janet reached for it, but I held up my hand. Let me. Hello? Mr. Sullivan, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Elder Abuse Unit. We've received a report about potential financial exploitation and medical fraud. I need to ask you some questions. Rebecca was watching me like a condemned prisoner waiting for her sentence. Tommy stood beside my chair, still recording, still documenting everything. Detective Martinez, before we proceed, there's something I need to tell you. Something that changes everything. Janet frowned. Rebecca looked confused. Tommy lowered his recorder slightly. What is it, sir? 3 days before my wife Martha died, she gave me a letter. She made me promise not to open it until after she was gone. I reached into my dresser drawer and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with tape. I opened it 6 months ago. Rebecca was staring at the envelope like it contained her death warrant. What did the letter say? I broke the seal carefully, my hands trembling slightly. Not from weakness, from the weight of what I was about to reveal. My dearest Edward, I read aloud. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're facing the hardest test of our lives. I need you to know that I've been watching Rebecca for months, and I'm frightened by what I see. Rebecca's face had gone completely white. She's been asking questions about our finances, about life insurance policies and inheritance laws. She thinks I don't notice, but I see the way she looks at us now, not like her parents, but like obstacles to something she wants. Mom wrote that? Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. Edward, I know you'll want to trust her. I know you'll want to believe the best about our daughter. but I'm begging you to be careful. Test her character before you trust her with your life, because I don't think she sees you as her father anymore. I think she sees you as her inheritance." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca was crying again, but these tears were different. These were the tears of someone who'd been seen and judged and found wanting by someone they'd loved. "Detective Martinez, are you still there?" "Yes, sir. This letter, when was it written?" 3 years ago. Martha knew. She saw what was coming long before I was willing to admit it." Rebecca stood up shakily. "Dad, I would never have—" "Wouldn't you?" I folded the letter carefully. "Rebecca, everything you've done in the past 8 months was predicted in this letter. The financial theft, the medical fraud, the nursing home. Martha saw it all coming." Tommy was staring at the letter with fascination and horror. "Grandma knew Mom would do this?" "Your grandmother was a very wise woman. She understood that grief and money together can bring out the worst in people." I looked directly at Rebecca. "She hoped she was wrong about you." "She was wrong," Rebecca said desperately. "I'm not a monster, Dad. I was overwhelmed and I made terrible choices." "Yes, you did. The question now is what you're going to do about it." Detective Martinez's voice came through the phone speaker. "Mr. Sullivan, I still need to investigate the reports we've received. Regardless of the letter, crimes have apparently been committed." "I understand, Detective, but I'd like to make a request." "What kind of request?" I looked at Tommy, who was watching his mother with a mixture of love and disappointment that no 16-year-old should have to carry. "I want to propose an alternative to criminal prosecution, something that might serve justice better than prison." Rebecca looked up with desperate hope. "What kind of alternative?" "Complete restitution, professional counseling, community service, and a formal agreement that Rebecca will never again have any legal authority over my affairs or Tommy's." "Dad, it's not forgiveness, Rebecca, it's mercy, and it comes with conditions that will be legally enforced." Detective Martinez was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Sullivan, that's a very generous offer, but the state has an interest in prosecuting elder abuse cases." "I understand. But consider this. Tommy will lose his mother to prison, or he can keep her while learning that actions have consequences." I looked at my grandson, who was old enough to understand the choice I was offering him. "What do you think, Tommy? Do you want to see your mother prosecuted, or do you want to help her become someone worthy of forgiveness?" 6 months later, I'm sitting in the same chair in the same room, but everything has changed. Rebecca enters with my breakfast, real food this time, prepared with something that approaches care. She sets the tray down carefully and sits across from me. "Dad, Janet called. The restitution payment went through. That's the last of it. $77,436. Every stolen cent, paid back through a combination of her salary, a second job at the weekend clinic, and the sale of everything valuable she owned." "How are you feeling?" She considers the question seriously. 6 months of court-mandated therapy has taught her to examine her emotions rather than just react to them. "Tired, grateful, still ashamed." She pauses. "But cleaner, if that makes sense." It does make sense. Confession and restitution have a way of washing the soul, even when the process is legally enforced rather than voluntary. Tommy appears in the doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder. At 17, he's grown 3 inches and gained 20 pounds of muscle from his job at the community center. "Morning, Grandpa. Morning, Mom." His relationship with Rebecca is still fragile, still being rebuilt one conversation at a time. But there's respect there now, earned through her willingness to face consequences rather than run from them. "Your scholarship interview is today?" I ask. 2:00. Professor Williams from the engineering department. The scholarship is funded through Sullivan Holdings, though Tommy doesn't know that. Some gifts are best given anonymously. After he leaves for school, Rebecca and I sit in comfortable silence. Not the old silence of resentment and calculation, but something newer, something that might eventually grow into peace. "Dad, I've been thinking about what Mom wrote in that letter." "Oh?" "She was right about what I was becoming, but I don't think she knew what you could become either." "What do you mean?" You became someone willing to test love instead of trusting it. Someone willing to watch his daughter destroy herself rather than intervene. She meets my eyes directly. Someone willing to use grief and manipulation as weapons. It's a fair observation. My methods weren't entirely noble. Testing people you love is its own form of cruelty. You're right. I could have handled things differently. We both could have. This is what family looks like after betrayal and redemption. Scarred but honest, damaged but still standing. Rebecca, I want you to know something. Despite everything that happened, despite all the pain we've caused each other, I'm proud of the woman you're becoming now. She smiles, and for a moment, I see the little girl who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares. Thanks, Dad. That means everything. If you're listening to this and you recognize some of these patterns in your own family, remember this. People can change, but only if they face real consequences for their choices. Love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enabling. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to prove they're better than their worst moment. Subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because family isn't about blood alone. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard.